Good morning and welcome to Tuesdays with the Pilgrim as we continue reading The Bishop Who Ate His Boots with Chapter 8, Part B. The outbreak of the First World War within weeks of the Stringers' return to Canada banished all thought of any immediate completion of the endowment fund. But by 1920 the task was completed. Nor was the war's effect limited to such matters. There were great changes in the way of life for all Yukoners, as for all other Canadians. Most of the able-bodied men flocked early to the colors. All of those who remained, men, women, and children, were busy raising funds for patriotic purposes and providing comforts for those who were in the service. Even the children were actively involved, and in June 1915, an entertainment given by the pupils of Dawson Public School yielded $596. In addition, collections were made at all of the Sunday schools. Two of the clergy, J.A. Davies and F.H. Buck, volunteered and were accepted for service as chaplains. There was constantly in the bishop's mind the feeling that he should offer his services. In this he was perhaps encouraged by the fact that A.U. Despenser, the Bishop of New Westminster, had done so almost as soon as the war broke out. The authorities, however, did not seem at all anxious to accept him, perhaps because of his age, or possibly because they felt that bishops had more important duties elsewhere. Bishop Stringer continued to urge them, and in fact in the dying days of the war he received the offer of an appointment. At the same time he was offered a post with the YMCA, and spent 2 or 3 days in anxious debate with himself and his friends, trying to decide which to accept. His inclination was towards the military chaplaincy, but with the end of the hostilities seeming imminent, the authorities would give him no assurance that he would be sent overseas. He therefore accepted the YMCA invitation. As the war drew to its close, there was a growing awareness of the importance of preparing both officers and men for their return to civilian life. Part of this preparation was to be achieved by a Christian citizenship campaign under the auspices of the YMCA. Speakers were selected to visit the troops in the British Isles and on the continent, and among those chosen was Bishop Stringer. Their job was to visit military installations and to meet members of the armed forces who would shortly be returning to Canada, in order to acquaint them with the changed and changing conditions at home. Alone or in the company of another, each speaker went from camp to camp, addressing large groups of men, and sometimes 2 or 3 such groups in the course of a day. In addition to the rehabilitation lecture, each of the speakers was prepared to give an address in a lighter vein. Bishop Stringer spoke on the Northland and accompanying his address with lantern slides. A.H. Sovereign, another of the speakers, spoke about mountaineering. Not only was this service a valuable contribution to the Christian citizenship campaign, it was also a wonderful and exciting experience for the bishop, taking him, as it did, through France, Belgium, and up the Rhine River. At the end of his tour, and before returning to Canada, he spent a few weeks doing missionary deputation work in England. By the beginning of August 1919, he was back in Toronto, where Mrs. Stringer joined him. In a diocese such as that of Yukon, the Indian population was never out of sight, and therefore never out of mind. In such circumstances it was natural that much of the time during the synod meeting should be devoted to a consideration of Indian affairs, and of the steps necessary to improve their condition. At the first synod in 1907, resolutions were passed urging the protection of Indian rights in such matters as hunting, trapping, fishing, and the provision of lands. They also urged the authorities to provide grants to build suitable sanitary houses and adequate schools. The health of the Indians was a matter of great concern. Tuberculosis was an ever-present threat, and one to which the Indians were particularly susceptible. The bishop obtained sets of Indian slides illustrating the dangers of infection and methods of treatment. These he used frequently among the Indian people and urged other clergy and workers to do likewise. Successive synods urged the necessity of nursing and medical services among the Indians. Among the broader issues which occupied the attention of the bishop and the synod were those concerning family life, Sunday observance, temperance, and the revision of the prayer book. A matter of great concern was the Ne Timbre decree promulgated by Pope Pius X, and which was claimed by the Roman Catholic Church to be effective in Canada from Easter 1908. Broadly speaking, the decree claimed that any marriage ceremony involving Roman Catholics performed by a minister other than a Roman Catholic priest was invalid. In the months following the publication of the decree, Stringer's diaries contained frequent references to it and to conferences and conversations concerning it. At the Synod of 1911, he pointed out that it would be unfortunate if the state, for its own protection, should be compelled to make marriage a purely civil matter. He hoped that the Roman Catholic Church would withdraw its insistence upon the decree in Canada, as had been done in Germany. The decree remained, but it did not create the public furore which Stringer and others feared. In this connection, it is to be noted that Stringer was never as violently opposed to the Church of Rome as some contemporary evangelicals were. Nor was he opposed to all the use of alcoholic beverages, although he himself was a total abstainer. In speaking to the Synod of 1911 of the wave of intemperance which was said to be sweeping across the world, he said, "The excessive use of strong drink has been one of the greatest evils of the country. Our influence should always be on the side of temperance, not only in strong drink, but in all things." He continued the theme in the 1915 Synod and commended to the delegates the resolution of the House of Bishops, urging all church people to practice total abstinence for the duration of the war. The subject did not recur until 1923, when the bishop in his charge took exception to the action of the Territorial Council in passing legislation to permit the sale of beer and wines in hotels, clubs, and roadhouses without first having held a referendum. Almost from the beginning of Stringer's episcopate, the subject of the prayer book revision had occupied the Canadian Church's attention. Before the end of the 19th century, the need of a distinctively Canadian prayer book had been discussed. In the early years of the 20th century, it was proposed that a Canadian appendix should be prepared as a supplement to the English prayer book of 1662. But at the 1908 sessions of General Synod, provision was made for a Canadian book. Bishop Stringer, by virtue of his office, sat as a member of the revision committee, but he took little actual part in the preparation of the new book. He made a passing reference to the work of the revision in his charge to the Diocesan Synod of 1915. The possibilities of Christian reunion were also receiving some attention, both as a result of the Anglican invitations of 1886 and 1920 to a conference on reunion, and more particularly because of the negotiations which were actually in progress between the Congregationalists, Methodists, and Presbyterian bodies. In his charge to the Synod of 1828, the bishop reviewed the events which had led to the formation of the United Church of Canada, and offered that a body of our assurance of goodwill, our best wishes for success unto perfection in the great venture of union upon which they have embarked. Christian unity was a matter which would appeal to Stringer both because of his own early background and his uncomplicated, almost naive approach to the faith. At the same time, it was not for him a live or pressing issue. Outside of Dawson City and Whitehorse, the only churches to be found were the Roman Catholic and Anglican, between which any union was most unlikely. In 1928, the bishop reported to the Synod on the establishment of the Anglican National Commission. It had been set up by the General Synod in the previous year to make a thorough study of the problems and needs of the Church, and to evolve plans through which its work could be done with maximum efficiency and economy. During Stringer's episcopate, there were 3 sessions of the Lambeth Conference, those of 1908, 1920, and 1930, and of these he attended the first and third. His diaries contain practically no reference to the sessions of 1908, and he made but passing mention of it in his synod charge of 1911. During the 1908 Lambeth Conference, he received a telegram informing him of the birth of his third son, Wilfred Isaac Bumpus. In 1920, the state of his health precluded his attendance. Bishop and Mrs. Stringer arrived at Liverpool on June 22, 1930. They went at once to London prior to the opening of Lambeth Conference. For Mrs. Stringer, the next few weeks provided an exciting whirl of social and ecclesiastical functions and an opportunity for visiting and sightseeing. For the bishop, it was interesting but strenuous. The general subject of the conference was the faith and witness of the Church in this generation. For the first week, the 307 bishops sat in a single large group and papers were presented, introducing the subjects proposed for discussion. The next 3 weeks saw the bishops in committees and subcommittees wrestling with particular aspects of the general topics. Bishop Stringer was assigned to the Committee on Anglican Communion. Its duties were to consider the integral relationships and organization of the churches within the Anglican Communion, their names, the rights and responsibilities of the bishops, and the possibilities of reciprocal pension arrangements. There is no indication that Bishop Stringer took any very prominent part in the deliberations. He attended the session zealously, but was quite possibly somewhat overwhelmed by the very magnitude of the conference. His report to the Diocesan Synod in the following year was a fairly lengthy, though dispassionate commentary on the proceedings. He singled out 3 areas for special attention. He referred to the relevance of the doctrine of God. In the present age, he said, many were becoming unsettled by new thought, but those who hold fast to the creeds will find that things will come right in time. His reference to the section of the report entitled, quote, "The Life and Witness of the Christian Community," unquote, was quite brief and did no more than point out that, quote, "the only brief reference was made to the birth control which the press in many instances discussed quite separately from the context," unquote. Most of his statement to the Synod was devoted to a description of the South India reunion scheme, concerning which he said, quote, "We can assure the leaders of the churches concerned that our whole communion will surely stand by them with earnest prayers and generous loyalty. 40 years ago such a union would have been impossible. For the wonderful way in which God has been leading, we thank God and take courage," unquote. A final matter which remained unchanged throughout Stringer's episcopate, although he must have been aware of it, was that of provincial affiliation. The Diocese of Yukon had originally formed part of the Diocese of Rupert's Land. Later, as part of the Diocese of Athabasca, it was included in the ecclesiastical province of Rupert's Land when it came into being in 1875. After the gold rush, however, and particularly after the opening of the White Pass and Yukon Railway in 1900, the whole situation changed. No longer did travelers make their way from Edmonton down the Mackenzie Valley and over the mountains into the Yukon Valley. Instead, they went by ship from Seattle, Victoria, or Vancouver through the Inside Passage to Skagway, Alaska. The possibility of forming an ecclesiastical province of British Columbia was mooted as early as 1880, but no action was taken. When in 1910 the representatives of the 4 dioceses of British Columbia, Caledonia, New Westminster, and Kootenay met to discuss the matter, a formal proposal was drafted for the formation of an ecclesiastical province, as its boundaries were to be coterminous with those of the civil province of British Columbia. The Diocese of Yukon was not included. The Provincial Synod of British Columbia met for the first time in February of 1914. Inevitably, a large part of the bishop's administrative burden consisted of finding adequate resources of men and money. In addition to the large amounts he raised outside the diocese, he was also aware of the need for self-help and missionary giving within. From the beginning, the diocese had been expected to make its contribution to the work of the Church at large, and in 1915 it was reported to the General Synod that Yukon's apportionment for the previous 11 years had amounted to $3,844, of which $2,445, or nearly 2/3, had been paid. The recruiting of men did not seem to be as difficult as finding money to pay them. Stringer generally relied on clergy for the white parishes and missions, and clergy or native catechists for the Indian and Eskimo work. When he became bishop, there were a few Englishmen without theological training serving as lay workers. Some of these he ordained, and they remained in the diocese for varying lengths of time. Most of the clergy he recruited came from one of 4 theological colleges: Wycliffe, Huron, Emmanuel, and the Anglican Theological College of British Columbia. Most of them had completed the full course in theology, although not all were graduates in arts. He did not seem to favor lay workers as a rule, his uncle, W.D. Young, and Miss Catherine Martin being notable exceptions. The Indian and Eskimo catechists continued their ordinary occupations, but received some payment for expenses incurred in connection with their ministrations. 2 of them, Amos Natuj and Richard Martin, were admitted to the diaconate, and a third, Julius Kendi, was ordained priest. As an ambassador, Bishop Stringer was appealing and convincing because of his obvious involvement in his work. As an administrator, he was simple, straightforward, and practical. In neither capacity could he be described as a visionary. He may have had his dreams for the church in the Yukon, but if so, they were nowhere apparent. Rather was he content to walk in accord with his master's precept. Quote, "Set your mind on God's kingdom and his justice before everything else, and all the rest will come to you as well. Do not be anxious about tomorrow. Tomorrow's work will look after itself. Each day has troubles enough of its own." From Matthew chapter 6, verses 33 and 34. And that's the end of chapter 8. Next week we'll continue with chapter 9. Until then, take care, stay safe, and God bless.